I'm just going to go through this quickly for you, and then you can work on your quizzes. The idea of functions is that we can build some reusable code. Reusable code means that we're going to spend a little bit of time making it really right in the first place, so they can be reused a lot of times. So what we do is we define a code. Once we've defined it, or declare it, I guess you could say, then we can call it and at any point in a program and run it. And in this lesson, which I hope won't take too long, we're going to look at just doing that. Right, so we have the concepts of sequence, selection, and iteration, which we talked about before. Now, the default is, when I say default, it means how would the program go if we just started it as it was. The default is that we go by sequence. That is, the first line is before the second line, is before the third line, etc. So they go in order that they appear in the program. That's the default. However, with selection, we can change the control of the program to go back to some earlier point or to repeat, and that would be iteration. With functions, it's not exactly the same idea as redirection or iteration, but with functions, what it is that we can say, all right, over here, we've got a bunch of code, and we give it a name, and when we call that name, we're going to go and execute that code. So it's a kind of way of sort of taking a bunch of code that we really like, that we know is working perfectly, and then on demand, we're going to use it. Boom. And that when we call it, the program control is transferred to the function, and we get the program control back when the function's complete. When I say we, I'm talking as if I was the main program. Now, here's some functions that you might be familiar with this type of a function. We got function f and function g. And function f and function g, how they work is if you pass an x into function f, and you pass a x and a y into function g, it will manage them and return something. This is kind of the way that functions work in our programming. And so we say that we refer to the things that are being passed in as the parameters. So here you can see the parameters x and y. If the parameter x is passed into the function f, then what will happen is x will be squared and 1 will be added to it, and that will be the result of function x. So function f will take whatever's passed into it, square it, and add 1 to it. Function g will take 2 parameters, and the first parameter will be added to 2 times the second parameter, which will be added to 2 times the first and the second parameter multiplied by each other. And this sort of, so if you had the, let's say you passed in the numbers 4 and 5, x was 4 and y was 5, what would happen? 4 plus 10 plus 40. So that's 54 plus 2, 56. That would give you a value of 56. If you did this as a computer, not program, but function, that you could be very reliable that it would work the same way every time. So that's a benefit of functions as well. Once we got it working once, we know that we can use it again and again and call it, and it'll always work the same. Now, in our flow charts, we represent functions in a special way. It looks like a process. The only difference between this function and a process in a flow chart would be that this function has a bar with 2 lines on either end of it. Otherwise, it looks like a function. It looks like a process. Now, when we look at that, we know that we should look later to see, well, where is that function defined? Because it would need to be defined somewhere. What we're going to do here is we're going to show how we could derive a function out of a bunch of a flowchart. It could be a pseudocode. So in this flowchart, we've got some inputs, 3 inputs going there. These 3 inputs, all 3 of them, which are grade, of a assignment, a quiz, and a test are then input into this process here. And then from there, we calculate well, the sum is calculated in this process, and then that sum is passed to this process, and an overall is calculated, and then that overall is displayed. Now, what you might do is you might say, hey, well, you know what? This is the type of thing that I'd like to repeat a lot over and over again. How could I do that? Well, I could take this bit of code out and turn it into a function, and then I could call that function later anytime I wanted. And so that's what's happening here. What's over here on the side is just that we have taken this bit of stuff out here, and we've turned it into kind of like a mini program that we call a function. And so that mini program, what it does is it says, well, there's three things that are going to be passed to this little mini program or function, and they are X, Y, and Z. Now, here before we called them assignment, quiz, and test. That's fine. This is going to be a bit more general purpose. Anything that you pass to it, any three things, they will be added together, and then they will be divided by 3, and then the result will be returned, which is A. Now, there's a black box over here now, but you'll notice that this black box over here has got 2 lines on either side because that's a function. This function here is represented here. Now, somewhere in our program, we would go and write a thing and say, define this function. We would define that. Then over here, if this was converted to a program, we would say, all right, at this point, call this function. When we call this function, we're going to pass these 3 parameters to it. We're going to pass the assignment, the quiz, and the test. Now look over here. It doesn't say assignment, quiz, and test. It says X, Y, and Z. But the order that they are passed, the first one's assignment, the second one's quiz, and the third one's test, is important when we get to the inside of the function. The order here is determined by, okay, what's going to be X, what's going to be Y, and what's going to be Z is determined by their order. So if these are put in that order, then X would be assignment, quiz would be Y, and Z would be test. And so this is like we're taking the assignment, the quiz, and the test, adding them together, and producing the result there. All right, so a function must have inputs, and a function has output maybe. It usually returns a value. And so we actually use the terms returns. The function is defined separate from the main program, and then the main program calls the function. A function doesn't have to be called directly from a main program. A function can call another function. So that's interesting. I won't go into recursive functions. You'll do that later. But a function A can call function B, no problem at all. All right, so the variables, so the point that's being made in this slide is that we have these 2 different ways of looking at variables. If you declared the variable in the main program, then the entire program can see it, including your function. If you declared a variable inside the function, the only place that you can use that variable is inside the function. Now, that's a very good thing because it allows us to keep integrity of our data in our programs. And so that's why this is happening. This is why we use local variables. But the X, Y, and Z, if you tried to refer to them in the main part of that program, you wouldn't be able to. That's what this means in that context. Okay, so we got an activity. I think we're just about, we're still, oh. You know what? I'm just going to stop right here. We'll go on with the rest of this stuff in the next lesson. So I'm going to stop right here in this activity, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how this works in a program. So you might have seen something like this before. This is a Python program. So this relates directly to the flowchart that is shown in this lesson. Relates directly to it. Here we are defining a function. We defined a function that takes in 3 variables, We've called them x, y, z. What that function does is add those three variables together to give a total, which we call s. These two lines here are just printing for us so that we can see what happens when we run the program. At the end of this function, it returns a value. So that means that when we call that function, it's going to return a value back to whatever calls it. Here's the main program. The main program actually starts here in this way, this implementation in Python. What the main program does, we've got a lot of print statements, just ignore them. That's not actually doing anything, right? It's not really processing. That's just for our benefit when we run the program so we can see what happened. But what's happening here is we're getting some things from the user, right? We're using input statements here. That is putting something on the screen saying, please give me something. And then whatever the user gives us is assigned to these variables. These are variables, assignment, quiz, and test, just like in the flowchart, right? Then what we do is we get an overall grade, which is those three things. What we're doing is we're calling this function. The function average 3 is past the parameters, assignment, quiz, and test, which we just got here, goes into that, and then output, what is returned out, is going to be stored in the variable called overall, so that we can print it out here. Now look very carefully at the lines of code. Line 2, line 3, line 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. They're in order, more or less, though some are missing. Let's run the program. Let me clear that because I've run it a few times already. Let's run it. Okay, so what's happening right here is it starts right here. It's asking for the assignment grade. You'll see that when I give a grade. Let me give a grade 87. Do you see it? It said that we started on line 6 and the next line was line 7. So line 7 is where we started. We started here, okay? This is where the program started. We got all this other stuff up here, but we didn't start there. We started here. We're going to do the quiz grade, and you'll see here, that's this thing here, right? Next line there. What is the quiz grade? Quiz grade was 76. And then the next thing it's asking for is the test grade. Test, and see the lines going. We went line 7, line 8. Test grade is, let's say they got a really good test grade at 98. All right, now watch what's happened there, right? We executed line 7, 8, 9. Then we went and executed line 2. So why did we go to line 2? And then we did line 3, and then we did line 10 and 11. Well, why we did that is because what happened after line 9? Line 9's here. The next line was call the function. The next line was call the function. We called the function there, and it processed the variables that it was given, assignment, quiz, and grade. We had to transfer control from this part of the program to the function. And so then it went ahead and did these things. This is line 2, right? So it added those three things together. And when it added them together, we see all the results coming out there. And then after it did line 2, it did line 3. And then finally it popped out and did these two lines down here, line 10 and 11. This is happening, the stuff that's indented, that's happening inside the function. All right, so we took those three numbers and we added them to, all right, they were added together, were they? No, they weren't. They added them together, and then we divided by 3 to get the average. And then those things were all, the overall average was printed out. That's how that worked. I don't want to spend too much time on that because I know that you guys want to just get on with the test, right? So I'll give you a little bit more time for the test. Any questions on this? You can see we didn't finish the lecture. I'll finish it next time. But I wanted you to see how, well, I'm not asking you to write Python programs, but I think that looking at the Python program maybe might be convincing that flowchart actually works. All right, so let's just get on with it then. I know that's all you really want to do. You don't want to listen to me talking. All right.